Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how I created this cute little tree frog drawing with colored pencils. Give the video a like and be sure to subscribe for more art related videos. Normally I don't include backgrounds with my colored pencil pieces because it just takes so long, but I decided to do a background with this one just to show how long it really takes and that you can still get a really nice background look using colored pencils. Now, I would say the background took me just as long as the main frog and the flower did, so keep that in mind. Backgrounds do take a lot longer, but the main focus here is layering. You're going to want to put a lot of layers on the paper. Now, I'm using a hot pressed watercolor paper here, so it is a little bit more toothy, so I can get a lot more layers down. Now, I like to blend out my colored pencils with odorless mineral spirits. And to be able to do that, I've got to get a good 4 or 5 layers down on the paper first before I can go ahead and blend it out. But I really like that smooth painterly look that it gives me, and you'll see that coming up in the video once I get to the blending part. But what I'm doing right now for the background is just picking some greens that I'm planning to use in the frog, and I'm incorporating that into my background. Now I am sticking fairly closely to the background of the picture. However, I really love that blue-green that I end up putting down by the red flower, and I'm just drawn to blue-greens a little bit more than like the warmer greens, so I chose to include that in my picture. If you were following along over on Patreon with my real-time tutorial of this, I showed you what green I would have used if I wanted to keep it closer to the reference photo. Now, I'm also using mostly wax-based pencils to do the background, and the reason for that is because they blend out a little bit smoother than a harder pencil would, like an oil-based pencil like polychromos. Now, I do end up using, I think, one polychromos in the background. I think it's my brown, and it's just because it was the color that I wanted. But usually when I'm doing a background or a very large area and I want a nice smooth blending, I'll choose my more wax-based pencils. So those would be your Prismacolor, Caran d'Ache Luminance, even the Derwent Light Fast I would say is a little bit more waxier, or at least they do blend out a lot better with OMS. Now I have a little jar specifically for my OMS that I keep it in, and I just have like a makeup sponge in there like that you would wipe your eye makeup off or whatever, and I just get that saturated with the OMS. I find dipping my brush on that gives me just enough rather than dipping in the jar. I find sometimes I get too much and then the colored pencil will actually move around on the paper. And this is one of my favorite parts of the drawing process with colored pencils, is putting the OMS to the paper, because it just smooths out that colored pencil. The colors really pop on the paper. It gives it like a very nice painterly look. Now, you don't have to use OMS to blend out your colored pencils at all. It just speeds up the process for me. But if you're not using your odorless mineral spirits, you're just going to want to layer up enough. Once you get your base colors down and you know where all of your colors are going to be, you just keep layering up until you've covered the tooth of the paper enough for your liking. Now, once you're done blending, you want to go ahead and give it a good 20 to 30 minutes to dry, especially depending on how much OMS you've used. And then once it's dry, you can go right back over top and do a second layer. I do that just to make it a little bit more opaque and the colors punch a little bit more. And then I blend out again with my odorless mineral spirits. Now, the more colored pencil that you have, so the more times you go on and layer and blend out, you want to use even less OMS. So I'll dip my brush. I'm using a Taklon bristle brush here to blend out with the OMS. I'll dab that on my makeup sponge, and then I'll dab it again on a paper towel just to make sure I have barely any OMS on my brush. And the more layers that you have, it will blend out even easier, especially with less OMS on your brush. If you end up having too much on your brush, it will actually move the colored pencil around almost like paint. So if you're having that effect, you're using way too much on your brush. Now I'm starting with the flower, and I'm using the same techniques here. And I always use a light to medium pressure to start with. I'm just using enough pressure for the color to show up on the paper. And if I want it more saturated, I'll just go over that area with the pencil more rather than pushing harder. If I push too hard at the beginning, then I tend to squish down the tooth of the paper and I won't be able to get as many layers on it. So it looks like my pencils are going on pretty saturated, and they are because they're very bright colors that I'm choosing for this, because the flower is a very bright red, a very bright yellow, but I'm also going over the same areas multiple times so that that color lays down a little bit heavier instead of pushing harder. Now for my base layers, I do like to put some details in, so you see me putting in some of those dark areas on the flower, but I'm not putting in the shadows around the frog yet. Sometimes when we start to blend our first layers, the pencil can blend out a little bit more, so I don't put in as many details as I would for my second layer, because some of that's just going to get all blended out and it's going to be wasted. And then I just come back in, and the same thing with the background. I'm using the OMS with my Taklon bristle brush, and I'm using that to blend out. And I always start in the lightest areas and then blend towards the darker areas. And when I'm switching colors, if I'm going from that bright red to that yellow again, I'll wipe my brush off on the paper towel, I'll dip it back in on the OMS, and I'll even wipe it off again because I don't want to transfer that darker color to my brighter color. Now I'm coming in with my shadows around the frog, and what's going to make our piece look realistic here is having our values. So yes, color is important to a certain extent, but I want to make sure I get these nice dark shadows in underneath the frog, because that's really going to make him look like he's popping off that flower instead of he's just like a 2D object there. So because the frog is my main subject in this piece, I want to make sure I have my lightest lights and my darkest darks in the frog, and that contrast is going to help him pop off the page. So I have my background a little bit more muted and dark, and I do have some lights and darks in the flower, but the most contrast is going to be in my frog, and that's going to help him stand out from all the other subjects, especially since there's a green background there. I don't want that to compete with my frog, so I want him to have the strongest contrast so that he'll pop away from those other subjects. Now I do come in at the very end with my Touchup texture and titanium white just to add a few highlights to the frog. However, if you're not using that, before you start working on the frog, anywhere you want a very bright white highlight, come in with a wax-based pencil. So that could be your Prismacolor, your Caran d'Ache Luminance. I wouldn't choose the Polychromos for this because it's too translucent, but what you're going to do is take that wax white-based pencil and just burnish those areas, those little white areas that you want at the beginning. And then when you come over top with your colored pencil, that area is going to be saved white. And you can even blend with your OMS over top of it, and it's going to save that area white. So that's another tip for you there. Now for the little frog, I'm using the same greens I've used in the background. I'm using the same reds and oranges that I've used in the flower. So I'm trying to use the same colors throughout the whole piece. I'm just using them either a little bit lighter or a little bit darker, but I want the piece to look cohesive. If you're interested in my real-time tutorials, I will put the link down below in the description. For less than a cup of coffee a week, you get access to all my previous tutorials, plus a new video every week over on my Patreon. I would love to see you over there. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please be sure to like and subscribe. And as always, I'll see you in the next video.